It starts in the quiet moments, the moments no one else sees. You open your phone, or walk into a room, or hear someone else's success, and suddenly your mind does that thing again, pulling out a ruler you never agreed to carry, measuring yourself against people who aren't you, people who don't live your life, people who have no idea you're comparing your entire existence to their highlight reel. And you tell yourself you shouldn't feel this way, but you do, because deep down, there's a voice whispering, "Why aren't you enough yet?" And you feel it every single time. Comparison is one of those quiet things the mind does when it thinks no one is watching. It feels small at first, like a passing thought, a tiny sting, a flicker of insecurity. But the truth is, comparison is never just a thought. It's a story you've been telling yourself for years without realizing it. A story shaped long before you ever opened a social media app, long before you heard the word success, long before you knew what it meant to be seen. The habit of comparing yourself isn't a flaw in your character. It's not proof that you're jealous or weak. It's something far more human, far more ancient, and far more rooted in the ways you learned to survive the emotional landscapes of your early life. Because comparison isn't really about other people. It's about the mirror inside you that no one else sees. Think of it this way. From the moment you were old enough to understand the world, you were also taught directly or indirectly how to evaluate your worth. Maybe it happened in a family where your achievements determined how much attention you received. Maybe it happened in a school where being average meant being invisible. Or maybe it happened quietly, through the way adults talked about others. Always ranking, always measuring, always pointing out who was better. And your young mind absorbed all of it like a sponge. Comparison becomes a language, a secret dialect of the wounded, a way of asking, "Am I enough yet? Have I finally earned the right to be loved, to be chosen, to be seen?" You didn't choose this habit. It was given to you, shaped in you, fed to you in small fragments. Look at your brother. Why can't you be more like her? People your age already have this figured out. And the worst part, some of these messages were never spoken out loud. They were said in sighs, in silences, in glances that lasted a little too long. You learned to measure yourself, not because you wanted to, but because you were trained to. But here, the quiet truth no one tells you. Comparison is never about the other person. It's about the gap between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be. It's about the illusion that everyone else has their life together while you're still trying to make sense of your own. It's about the invisible standards you inherited from a world that was often unkind, demanding, or emotionally inconsistent. And yet, even knowing all this, you still feel the sting. You still feel that familiar tightening in your chest. Because comparison doesn't ask for permission, it simply shows up, blending into your thoughts, convincing you that you're behind in a race you never agreed to run. But let me tell you something, gently. You are not behind. You are not failing. You are not late. You're simply carrying a story that wasn't written by you, and today, we're going to rewrite it. It almost always begins earlier than you think. Not in adulthood, not in your teenage years, but in those quiet, impressionable moments of childhood, when the world felt bigger than your body, and every expression on an adult's face felt like a weather pattern you had to interpret to survive. You weren't born comparing. You were taught to. And the teaching didn't come from lessons or lectures. It came from emotions, from atmospheres, from the unspoken language of the home you grew up in. Maybe you grew up in a family where love was conditional, where affection could disappear if you didn't perform well enough, where praise was rare, but comparison was abundant. Maybe you remember the way an adult's eyes would light up when your sibling succeeded, and dim when you tried your best, but it wasn't good enough. You learned early that being yourself wasn't the key to being loved. Being better was, or maybe it wasn't said so directly. Maybe it was softer, more insidious. A parent who compared themselves to others constantly. She's doing so well. They bought a new house. Everyone else seems ahead, not realizing you were listening, not realizing you were absorbing their anxiety like secondhand smoke. When children hear adults comparing, they don't think that's about them. They think, this is how we evaluate worth. And then there were the moments when you needed reassurance, but got judgment instead. When you were afraid or confused or imperfect, and instead of comfort, you received a comparison that cut deeper than anyone realized. Other kids don't cry about this. Why can't you be more confident? Look at your friends, they're doing so much more. And something inside you learned that your feelings were not acceptable as they were. They needed to be upgraded, improved, or hidden. Some of you learned comparison from silence, those heavy, hollow silences where you felt unseen. Children who don't feel seen don't stop wanting to be seen. They just start competing for it. They start scanning the room, the world, themselves, trying desperately to find the version of them that might finally be enough. It's not vanity, it's survival. It's a tender child reaching out for emotional warmth in the only way they know how. Others learned comparison because a caregiver was unpredictable, loving one moment, distant the next. That emotional inconsistency forces a child to study everything: expressions, tone, mood, behavior, and eventually, themselves. You became hypervigilant, not because you wanted to be, but because you had to be. You monitored everything, including your own worth, trying to anticipate the next shift in the emotional climate. Comparison became your weather forecast. It helped you prepare for storms that weren't your fault. And then there were the subtle cultural and social messages layered on top. Teachers who pinned gold stars next to certain names. Relatives who praised your cousin's talent while calling you the quiet one. Classmates who judged you by numbers on a paper or the brand of your shoes. Slowly, the world taught you a formula. Compare yourself, improve yourself, repeat. It didn't matter how exhausted you were, the formula demanded more. But the truth is this: the moment you started comparing yourself wasn't about competition, it was about belonging. Every child wants to know they matter. Every child wants to feel enough. And when your environment didn't give you those answers, you went searching for them. And comparison became the compass, a compass that never pointed north. Picture your younger self, small, hopeful, sensitive, peeking into the world for signs that they were worthy. Now imagine that same child watching everyone else receive the validation they longed for. Is it any wonder that they began to wonder what was wrong with them? Is it any wonder they learned to scan others for clues about their own identity? This is the moment innocence shifts, when a child no longer experiences themselves as simply themselves, but as a reflection of everyone around them. This is when comparison stops being an observation and becomes a self-protection strategy, a shield, a way of preempting disappointment, a way of avoiding rejection, a way of controlling feelings that felt too overwhelming to sit with. And the saddest part, you never knew this was happening. You never realized that each comparison carved a little piece of you away. You didn't notice the moment you began shrinking, trying to fit into the mold you believed others wanted. You didn't realize you were burying parts of your true self in exchange for conditional acceptance. But that buried child is still inside you, still waiting, still watching, still hoping you'll stop comparing yourself long enough to finally look inward and whisper, "You are enough. You are always enough." Comparison doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it slips into your life dressed as motivation, or humility, or awareness. Sometimes it hides behind things that look responsible on the outside, but feel exhausting on the inside. And most people will never understand how deeply it runs in you, how it shapes your thoughts, your self-worth, your identity. But you know. You feel it in ways words struggle to capture. You might not say it out loud, but there are signs. Quiet, tender signs that reveal just how much comparison has woven itself into your emotional DNA. You might find yourself scrolling through someone else's life and feeling your chest tighten, not because you're angry at them, but because a part of you whispers that you're behind. You see their smiles, their achievements, their milestones, and something inside you collapses just a little, as if their success somehow subtracts from your worth. It doesn't, but it feels like it does. You might constantly adjust who you are depending on the people around you, like an emotional thermostat trying to match the temperature of the room. When someone confident enters the space, you shrink. When someone accomplished speaks, you silence yourself. When someone seems certain of their path, you question yours. Not because you want to be them, but because you've forgotten how to just be you. You might replay conversations endlessly, comparing what you said to what you could have said. You analyze your tone, your phrasing, your facial expressions, as if every interaction is a performance you're being scored on. You become your own harshest critic, grading yourself against standards that no one else is holding you to. You might notice that praise feels temporary, but criticism feels permanent. When someone compliments you, you brush it off. You assume they're being polite. When someone else shares their good news, you suddenly feel small, like you're standing in your own shadow. It's not jealousy, it's self-erasure, a reflex formed in the moments you felt invisible growing up. You might find it almost impossible to celebrate your own accomplishments. The moment you achieve something, your mind immediately finds someone who's done more. If you're proud of something, you instinctively compare it to someone else's achievement, and suddenly it feels insignificant. You diminish the very things you once prayed for. You might fixate on timelines, age, milestones, progress. You tell yourself that by now you should have accomplished certain things. You talk to yourself in deadlines. You measure your worth in numbers, the number of followers, the number in your bank account, the number of goals you've checked off. As if life were a scoreboard rather than a journey. You might feel a constant, subtle pressure to prove yourself. Even when no one is asking, even when no one is watching. It's like you're carrying an invisible audience in your mind, waiting for you to impress them. And when you don't, you feel like you've failed. You might notice that joy comes with conditions. You can feel happy, but only if you're doing better than you were yesterday. You'll allow yourself rest, but only if you've earned it. You'll let yourself feel proud, but only until you see someone else doing more. Comparison turns joy into something temporary, fleeting, fragile, easily taken away. You might struggle to feel original. Every idea you have, you quickly compare it to someone else's work. You convince yourself it's not new enough, impressive enough, creative enough. You shrink your own voice because you assume everyone else is doing it better. You might hold back from starting something new because you convince yourself there are already people ahead of you. You don't allow yourself to be a beginner. You shame yourself for learning slowly. You measure your progress by someone else's timeline instead of your own pace. And perhaps the most painful sign of all, you treat yourself like someone who is constantly falling short. You don't speak to yourself with the gentleness you deserve. Instead, you compare who you are now to the version of yourself you think you should be, and you'll punish yourself for not being there yet. It's a quiet form of self-abandonment. The kind that leaves you feeling empty, even on your best days. These signs don't make you weak. They don't make you shallow. They don't make you ungrateful. They make you human, with a tender history, a sensitive heart, and a mind trained to evaluate itself, instead of embrace itself. Comparison isn't your identity. It's a symptom of an emotional wound you didn't create. And the truth beneath all of this is simple. You compare yourself because you care. You care about becoming someone you can be proud of. You care about meaning something. You care about being enough in a world that rarely tells you you already are. But caring shouldn't hurt this much. Even though comparison feels emotional, poetic, deeply personal, there is a science behind it. Your brain isn't betraying you. It's following patterns wired into you long before you understood what self-erasure meant. Psychologists often say that comparison is an evolutionary reflex. Humans survived by studying each other. Who was stronger? Who was safer? Who was accepted by the group? Belonging meant survival. Rejection meant danger. And even today, your nervous system carries that ancient wiring. When you compare yourself, it's not vanity. It's biology trying to keep you safe. But here's where it becomes more complicated. Your early environment shaped that reflex into something hyperactive. If you grew up in a home with criticism, unpredictability, emotional distance, or constant evaluation, your brain learned to monitor others intensely. This is the essence of hypervigilance, the sense that you must always scan the world to know where you stand. Not because you're competitive, but because staying aware kept you from getting hurt. Neuroscience tells us that your brain's amygdala, the fear center, reacts more strongly when you feel less than. It interprets comparison as emotional danger. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic and reassurance, struggles to calm the storm if it wasn't trained with consistent emotional support growing up. This is why comparison feels like a sudden flood rather than a passing thought. Research from places like Berkeley and the Journal of Personality often describes comparison as a distortion of the locus of control. Instead of evaluating yourself by your own values, your brain uses external markers, other people's achievements, timelines, appearances, identities. You lose your inner compass, and everything outside becomes the standard you measure yourself against. There's also the power of mirror neurons, the parts of your brain that reflect the emotions and experiences of others. They help you empathize, but they also make you vulnerable. When you see someone's success, your brain treats it like a personal prompt. Should I have that too? Am I falling behind? You absorb others more deeply than most people realize. Carl Jung spoke about the shadow self, the parts of you you've hidden, rejected, or judged. Comparison often wakes up the shadow. When you see someone embody a trait you've disowned: confidence, creativity, freedom, your shadow stirs. Not because you dislike them, but because a buried part of you longs for what it was never allowed to express. Psychologists also talk about self-gaslighting, the way you invalidate your own progress by comparing it to impossible standards. Your brain convinces you that your efforts don't count, that your timeline is wrong, that your worth is conditional. Not because it's true, but because your nervous system struggles to feel safe in its own pace. Even compassion fatigue can play a role. When you spend your life caring about others' feelings, achievements, and expectations, you become emotionally drained. That exhaustion makes comparison sharper, heavier, more painful. It becomes harder to see yourself clearly when your heart is stretched thin. So no comparison isn't a flaw. It's a pattern born from survival, shaped by experience, fueled by a nervous system that learned to protect you through vigilance, not self-trust. Understanding this isn't just knowledge, it's permission. Permission to stop blaming yourself for something your brain was trained to do. Permission to step out of the shadows of others and finally see yourself with clarity and compassion. Here's the part no one really talks about. The part that hides beneath the polite smiles, the small laughs, the casual "I'm fine." The part even you might avoid looking at too closely. Comparison isn't just a habit. It becomes a home. A dark, familiar room inside your mind where you return again and again, not because you want to, but because it's where your inner wounds were first formed, and wounds always ache in the same places they were created. The truth is this: comparison slowly steals your life without ever making a sound. It makes you live in a constant state of emotional debt, always owing yourself more, always feeling like you're running behind, always believing there's something you haven't done yet, something you haven't become yet. You walk through your days feeling like you're trying to catch up to versions of yourself that don't even exist. It convinces you that everyone else has a clarity you lack, that their happiness is real while yours is fragile, that their certainty is natural while yours is forced. You begin to believe you're the only one who feels lost. You forget that most people are performing confidence, not living it. Comparison builds a quiet hostility toward yourself. You don't mean to do it, you don't even realize it's happening. But every time you measure yourself against someone else, you teach your mind that you aren't enough. Not yet, not ever. And that becomes the lens through which you view everything, even your own progress. Here's the darkest truth: comparison makes you abandon yourself. You stop listening to your own desires because you're too busy chasing the desires you think you should have. You silence your intuition because it doesn't match the noise of the world. You dismiss your accomplishments because they don't look like someone else's. You stop noticing the beauty in your own path because you're too focused on the scenery of roads you were never meant to take. What people see: a hard-working, thoughtful person who has ambition. What they don't see: the silent screaming inside you, the exhaustion from constantly monitoring your own worth, the feeling of being emotionally winded even when nothing happened, the ache of never feeling proud for more than a moment, the grief of constantly comparing your real life to someone else's illusion. And grief is the right word, because comparison makes you mourn the person you could have been without ever letting you meet the person you already are. It also creates a harsh, invisible hierarchy inside your mind. You begin ranking yourself in every room you enter. Who's prettier, smarter, more confident, more stable? You become the judge and the defendant at the same time, and the verdict is always the same: you think you're not enough. But here's what no one tells you: when you compare yourself to others, you're not actually comparing you to them. You're comparing your insecurity to their presentation, your doubts to their highlights, your fears to their confidence mask, your behind the scenes to their carefully curated front. You are comparing the most fragile parts of yourself to the most polished parts of others. No wonder it hurts. No wonder it feels like you're always losing. The game was rigged from the start, and the emotional cost is deeper than you realize. Comparison burns through your self-esteem until all that's left is a version of you that feels smaller, quieter, more apologetic. It creates a life where you're never fully present because you're always mentally elsewhere, imagining someone else doing it better, faster, brighter. It creates a life where rest feels like laziness, where joy feels unearned, where pride feels dangerous, where being yourself feels like a risk you can't afford. This is the hidden suffering, the part no one sees, the part you carry alone, the part that whispers to you late at night: when will you finally be enough? But here's the truth: You've never been told clearly. You were never the problem. The mirror was. Healing from comparison isn't about never comparing again. It's about learning to return to yourself gently, consistently, compassionately every time your mind tries to wander into someone else's life. Because the truth is, comparison isn't the enemy. Forget what people say. Comparison is a messenger. It shows you where you're hurting, where you're longing, where you feel disconnected from your own worth. And healing begins the moment you stop fighting the comparison and start listening to what it has trying to tell you. So how do you move forward? Not with force, not with perfection, but with small, quiet shifts that bring you back to the center of your own life. The first step is learning to notice when you leave yourself. You know that feeling the moment your thoughts slip into someone else's story, the moment you start imagining how they would handle your life, the moment you stop being present and start being simply critical. Instead of judging yourself or comparing, pause. Notice the ache. Ask yourself, what part of me feels threatened right now? What part of me feels not enough? The moment you ask, the moment you become aware, the comparison begins to lose its power. The second step is reclaiming your inner compass, your locus of control. For so long, you've let the world decide your value. You've let external timelines dictate your pace. You've measured your worth with someone else's ruler. It's time to shift the ownership back. Start asking yourself, what do I value? What pace feels right for me? What would success look like if no one else could see it? This is psychological ownership, the moment you reclaim authority over your life. The third step is deeper, softer, more personal. You must meet the child inside you who learned to compare in the first place. The child who was evaluated instead of encouraged. The child who felt unseen. The child who believed they had to earn love by outperforming others. Sit with them, journal to them, talk to them, tell them what they never heard. You don't have to be better than anyone. You just have to be you. This is inner child healing, not a trend, but a return to the part of you that never deserved the pain of comparison. The fourth step is shadow work, not the scary kind, the real kind, the kind Carl Jung meant. Every trait you admire in others' lives inside you, too. You don't envy their confidence, you recognize it. You don't resent their success. You long for the part of you that wants freedom. You don't compare because you're lacking. You compare because something inside you is waking up. When comparison stings, ask yourself, what part of me is this pointing to? What part of my shadow wants to be seen, expressed, freed? Comparison becomes a compass not toward others, but toward your hidden self. And finally, the most important step. Offer yourself the kindness you've been withholding. Rest when you need rest. Celebrate your tiny victories. Speak to yourself with gentleness. Give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Let yourself be human, imperfect, in progress. You spent years being harsh with yourself. It's time to be soft. You're not broken for comparing. You're just someone who learned early on to measure your worth in reflections instead of truth. But you're not stuck. You're not lost. You're coming home to yourself, piece by piece, breath by breath. At some point, almost without noticing, you realize something has changed. You're scrolling, or walking, or thinking about someone else's life. And for the first time, it doesn't feel like a threat. It doesn't sting the way it used to. It doesn't drag you into that old loop of shame, urgency, and self-doubt. Instead, you feel a kind of quiet clarity. Because now, you understand what comparison was trying to show you all along. Not that others were ahead, but that you were hurting. You recognize the ache beneath the envy. You hear the fear beneath the pressure. You see the child beneath the adult, still waiting to feel enough. And that awareness changes everything. You stop chasing timelines that were never yours. You stop punishing yourself for not being someone else. You stop treating your life like a race. You finally give yourself permission to move at the speed that healing requires. Slow, steady, human. And maybe, for the first time ever, you look at your own path with something like gentleness. Not because you've arrived, not because everything makes sense, but because you finally see your life for what it truly is. Not a comparison, not a competition, but a story, uniquely, painfully, beautifully yours. And for the first time, that feels enough.